The art expo that I was a part of this past weekend was an incredible experience. And it was the first time that I've had the opportunity to see other people's reactions to my work who had no relationship with me and who didn't follow me online and had never been exposed to my work before. And so it was really interesting to sit there and watch people's reactions and their smiles and the wows and the incredibles and to hear the things and the words that they were using to describe my work. It was a very powerful moment. As a photographer, we don't often get that experience. And it was an experience that I hope I never forget the feeling of. See, because I've been on a quest and I've been trying to answer these questions that I have that revolve around art. And that experience and some conversations I've had since then have given me the opportunity to get a little bit further down the path towards answering these questions. One of them that I've had is, how does a photographer become an artist? See, because from my point of view, especially when a photographer just starts, you can shoot things artistically, but I wouldn't necessarily say that we're artists. And I think that most photographers' work that we create for other people wouldn't really be classified as art. It's a product or service, depending on how you want to define it. For example, a service would be product photography, wedding photography, portraits, business photography, architecture photography, real estate photography. Like, these things aren't created as art, it's created as a service, as a product for this individual that's hiring you. And I know a lot of people in the photography community might kind of disagree with me on some of these genres, but stick with me for a moment. With wedding photography, which I do shoot a fair number of weddings each year myself, and the way that I would define it is this: you can photograph a wedding artistically, but where the distinction between that and art comes into play is this. Most people, in fact, I've never heard of a situation where somebody looked at somebody else's wedding photos and the general public said, you know what, we would like to buy that wedding photo that you took of that person's wedding and hang it up in our wall as art. Right. Now, it doesn't mean that it wasn't shot artistically. And it doesn't mean that to that couple, to the photographer, that it's not art. But to the public, like, it's a product, it's a service that was offered to that couple, but it's not an art piece. And so there's these little nuances as I'm thinking about this question over the past couple of years. And so, most photographers, you have these different goals that you try to accomplish. Like, first you want to get good, and then you want to get paid, and then maybe you want to go full time, and then maybe you want to travel. And I've done all those things. And the next evolution for me was, well, how do I become an artist? Right? How do I get work, my images, to a level where the general public would look at it and say, I like that, and I would like to hang that on my wall. It's a very difficult thing to do. I would imagine it's simple on small scales. One person might really love a photo and say, yes, I'd love to put that on my wall. But how do you get images or a body of work where the public has a general attitude towards that body of work as, okay, this is art? And I feel like with painting and sculpture, it's kind of implied, it's built into it, right? Everything paintings and sculpture typically don't start off as like a product or a service for somebody. It kind of starts as art. Photos, for the most part, start off as a product or a service. And so it's a different kind of path and transition to becoming art. And so this expo was a very clear indication to me that whatever it is that I am doing with my work as I'm trying to answer this question is on the right path. And seeing other people's reactions to my work was validation of that as I'm trying to answer this question on how do you become an artist. And beyond that, there's another level that I've been exploring in my mind of like what makes somebody a capital A artist versus a lowercase a artist. So to illustrate my point, let me tell you a quick story. I was in LA, I was photographing for a client, and I went to the Museum of Modern Art. And right across the street is the Broad. And I was mispronouncing, I was calling it the Broad, but I was very quickly told, no, this is the Broad. And it's just an amazing art gallery, museum, right? So I walk in and I'm introduced to this individual's work, and his name is William Kentridge. And I've never heard this name before. And there was a line. And there was a few pieces and they were intriguing. And so I got into the line and I went to the exhibit and I spent hours with William Kentridge's work. And it was so reverent in there. It was packed. And everybody was just absorbing all the art that this man has created for us. Sculpture, film, sketches, drawings. Like he built these instruments, and there was one exhibit portion of it where you're like standing inside of the art exhibit, and it encompasses all the walls around you, and there's these projections onto these different canvases, and there's music that's involved. And, he's collaborated with ballets and opera houses, I believe. It was just, it was incredible. And I spent the whole time just absorbing the stories and the messages that William was sharing through his art. And the next day, I flew back to Phoenix, and the Tempe Art Festival is going on. And if you've ever been to an art festival, typically the way that you peruse art is you're walking through and you've got maybe your hand in your pocket and you breeze by maybe most of the booths, a cursory glance at one or two of them. Maybe the artist is sitting there and you kind of have an awkward moment where they want to engage you, but you're not that interested in the work that they've got there, so you're trying to disentangle yourself and keep moving on, but being polite and kind, because you do appreciate that they are there and that they are an artist. You might stop and pick up a piece of art or look at it, and if the artist is really lucky, you'll stop and you'll buy something. And I thought about the distinction between those two experiences I had over those couple days. And I asked myself, what is it that makes William a capital A artist versus a lowercase artist? And I've been asking and talking to people about this, and some suggestions that came to mind were from others was, well, was it talent, skill, passion, length of time? And the answer is no. Many of the artists that were at the Tempe Art Festival are just as skilled, just as talented. And who are we to judge their passion, right? Maybe they're just as passionate, or maybe even more than William about what it is that they do. So it wasn't any of those things. But there was something about the work of an artist that is the caliber of William Kentridge and many others like him, that when you look at it, it doesn't speak just to one person, right? It's kind of accepted somehow that when a group of people not connected to each other are in the same space with that work of art, they recognize it for the great piece of art that it is, even if they don't have an affinity for that type of art generally. And I've been asking myself, like, what is that? What is that alchemy that happens that takes a lowercase artist and transforms them into a capital A artist? And can that even happen? So let's go back to the art expo from the past weekend and had some wonderful conversations. And the last conversation I had of the night was with this other artist named Casey. And I was relaxing on a couch and she came and sat down next to me. And I asked her if she was an artist. And she said yes. And so we had this great conversation and we kind of started exploring these ideas because, I don't spend a lot of time in the company of other artists. And so whenever I do, I want to have these discussions, kind of explore these questions that I have. And Casey felt that to be a capital A artist, you have to be born that way. You can't necessarily be taught how to do that. And the example that she gave was, for example, let's say an NBA player, right? You can have all the dedication, passion, put all the time into the gym. Maybe you're a great shot, but no one's asking Shane to be in the NBA because I just was not born for that. It's very obvious. And so there are certain qualities that you just have to be born with. And it doesn't guarantee you success because you have to put in the hard work and all the other things that go along with that natural talent. But it's a combination of those two things. And, I'm sure that there's examples that might go counter to that. But for the most part, when somebody's truly, truly great at something, her argument was that if you trace it all the way back, you'll find elements of that throughout their whole life. Like they were born with something that just calls to them. And so we delved a little further into this conversation and we settled on this idea that I think it kind of struck true for me. It's that there's a sense of realness about the artists that we really get attracted to and see them as true artists. In everyday life, most of us there's some kind of mask that we're wearing, depending on the group of people that we're with, the environment that we're in. We're one person at home, we're one person at work, we're one person with our friends, we're one person with our colleagues, one person with our family. And we kind of started getting down to this idea with it. Maybe one of the qualities that makes somebody a really great artist is that sense of realness. And if you think about it, the people in your life that are the most real, there's usually something very attractive about them to you. You're drawn to them in some kind of way. Because they don't fit all the little boxes that we put ourselves into or that society says they have to belong to. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily weird or awkward or anything like that. It just, there's a sense of realness about them. And I thought about that. And I had another conversation a few days later. Actually, the next day, I went to dinner at a friend's house, and I photographed her wedding and her husband's wedding, and they invited me over for dinner. And was having some homemade pizza at their place, and we got started on this conversation as well because the husband, he's an artist himself, and she is too, theater and singing, and you know, we started discussing and dissecting this idea, and we kind of got to this point where we settled on this idea where that being playful is kind of a necessary component of being a great artist. And you think about who are the most playful people in our lives. It's often youth, right? Children are just so playful. And it's because there's a sense of realness about them. Right? They don't know that they're not supposed to do X, Y, Z. They're just themselves. And they're creative. And they're playful. And they're real. Sometimes somebody goes through life and they never lose that sense of what it was like to be that way. And they maintain it throughout their life. I don't know yet what all the answers are to these questions that I've been asking. But the Art Expo, the conversation that I had with Casey, and the conversation I had with Heather and her husband Adam were really helpful in helping me get a little bit closer to finding out what it is that makes a photographer an artist. And then beyond that, what makes somebody a capital A artist versus a lowercase artist. And it's a journey that I hope I can continue on with my work. I'm looking forward to all the future conversations and to get a little bit closer to the answer of these questions.